The moving truck had barely pulled away from the curb when the knock came. Mark Henderson stood in his open garage, organizing boxes of tools, still coated in a fine layer of dust from the road trip. He hadn't even set up his workbench yet when the knock came again, sharp, purposeful. He turned, wiping his hands on his jeans, and walked toward the front door. There she stood, mid-50s, blazer crisp in the summer heat, clipboard pressed to her chest like a badge of honor. Her smile was thin, eyes calculating behind cat-eye glasses. She didn't look like a neighbor. She looked like someone conducting an inspection. "You must be Mr. Henderson," she said. "Karen Simmons. I'm the president of the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association." Mark nodded once, cautious but polite. "That's me. Just got the keys yesterday." Karen extended the clipboard, flipping a tab. "Well, I like to meet all new residents right away. We take pride in our community. Clean, quiet, respectful. These are the rules and guidelines. They're mandatory for all homeowners." Mark took the stack, thumbing through the dense packet of printed regulations. "No problem," he said calmly. "I respect order." Karen didn't leave. Her eyes drifted past him into the garage, scanning the space, the flag in the corner, the wall hooks, half filled with tools. She seemed to take mental inventory. "Just a heads up," she said. "Tool storage has to be inside or screened. And large vehicles like that one can't be parked in the driveway for more than 24 hours. Mark followed her gaze to his pickup truck, his only vehicle. It was clean, quiet, and parked in his own driveway. "Appreciate the heads up," he replied, keeping his tone neutral. Karen smiled again, though her eyes didn't. "Well, we like to stay ahead of things before they become issues. Some people find the rules overwhelming at first, but I'm here to help." She tapped her clipboard. "If you need anything, you can call me directly. I like to keep things personal." Mark watched her turn on her heel and walk away, her heels echoing across the pavement. His dog Duke let out a soft huff from inside the house, sensing his owner's tension. Mark stared at the HOA packet in his hand. He wasn't looking for trouble. He came to Willow Ridge for peace, quiet days, long walks with Duke, time to work on machines in his garage, maybe coach a local softball team. But Karen's tone hadn't been welcoming. It had been a warning. The next morning, Mark found the first notice taped to his mailbox was a yellow slip. "Violation. Unauthorized display. Flagpole not pre-approved by HOA board." He blinked at the slip. The flag was mounted to his porch railing, just like in every neighborhood he'd ever lived in. He removed the notice, walked back to his porch, and looked at the flag fluttering gently in the breeze. It wasn't tattered or oversized, just an American flag he'd flown since his first tour. It was a principle to him. He didn't react that day, just made a note. He emailed the board, asking for clarification on the flag policy. No response came. 3 days later, a second notice appeared, this time citing visual clutter in his garage. The garage door had been open while he was unpacking. Then came the third notice, driveway vehicle violation. His pickup truck, which hadn't moved because he was still unloading, had been deemed a visual obstruction for the neighborhood. That evening, Mark sat on his front steps with Duke lying at his feet. He sipped coffee and watched Karen stroll past again, clipboard in hand, stopping briefly to scribble something while pretending to look at a bush. Mark narrowed his eyes, not in anger, but calculation. He'd been through worse, much worse. Karen wasn't the first person who tried to assert control with rules and paper, but she might be the first to mistake his silence for surrender. He didn't want to fight, but if one came, he'd be ready. Just like always, he reached into the box beside him, pulled out a small black security camera, and mounted it under the eave of his garage, just in case. The games had begun. The next week brought heat and hostility. Mark had lived in war zones quieter than Willow Ridge on a Tuesday morning. It started innocently enough. Mark was installing shelves in his garage, the soft hum of his drill barely audible from the sidewalk. Duke lounged nearby, his head resting on a folded blanket as Mark worked in rhythm, measured, Methodical. At exactly 10:17 a.m., a white sedan pulled up across the street. Out stepped HOA board member Dale Turner, a man who looked like he'd never owned a pair of jeans. He was followed by his wife, Cynthia, clipboard in hand, tight-lipped and armed with a camera. Mark watched them approach, wiping sweat from his brow. "We've received complaints," Dale said, squinting at Mark's tools. "About noise." "Noise," Mark said. He looked round. Birds chirped in the trees. A lawnmower buzzed 3 houses down. His own Joe lay silent on the bench. "Yes," Cynthia chimed in. "Several residents are concerned that this workshop activity is disruptive and possibly unpermitted." Mark looked at the half-finished shelving. "I'm building storage racks inside my own garage." Cynthia raised her camera and snapped a photo of the interior. "Would you mind closing the garage door during construction?" Dale asked. "It presents a certain aesthetic concern." Mark's patience stretched, but he nodded once. "Sure." They didn't thank him. They simply turned and walked away. Cynthia muttering into her phone as she crossed the street. That evening, Mark reviewed his security footage. There they were. Dale and Cynthia had parked across the street 30 minutes before approaching, snapping photos from their car, zooming in on his tools, on Duke, on Mark himself while he worked. He downloaded the footage and saved it on a secure drive. The next morning, he found another yellow violation posted on his front door. This time, unauthorized construction, interior modifications visible from exterior. He laughed out loud. Karen was escalating. Mark called the HOA office. A voicemail answered with a cheery, pre-recorded message. "The Willow Ridge HOA is dedicated to maintaining a peaceful and pristine community. Leave a message and someone from our team will get back to you within 5 to 7 business days." He didn't bother. He knew no one would call back. Instead, he drove to the community center, where the HOA office was located. The receptionist, a college-aged intern, looked startled as he stepped inside. "I'd like to speak to someone about this citation," Mark said, calmly laying the yellow notice on the counter. The girl glanced at the paper, then at Mark. Karen isn't in today. She usually handles all homeowner disputes personally." "Of course." Mark turned to leave, but paused at the bulletin board tacked there. Among flyers for yoga and pet grooming discounts was a photo of Karen smiling beside the mirror at a recent fundraiser. "Community Excellence Award." The caption read. He stepped back outside and stood on the sidewalk, squinting into the sun. A jogger passed by. A sprinkler kicked on. Everything looked normal. But beneath the surface, the HOA was more than a neighborhood committee. It was Karen's kingdom, her rules, her enforcement, and now, Mark had been marked as a threat. That evening, he and Duke walked their usual loop round the block. A few residents nodded politely, but many looked away. Some crossed the street entirely. Word was spreading. Mark wasn't angry. He was steady. He understood something now. This wasn't about violations, or noise, or lawn care. It was about control, about power. Karen needed obedience to feel safe. And he didn't kneel. He came home to find a typed letter in his mailbox and signed, "No return address. You're not one of us. You'll never fit in. Just leave before things get worse." Mark sat on his porch and read it twice. Then he leaned down, scratched Duke behind the ears, and said, "Well, buddy, they just made this personal." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten retaliation. Instead, he opened a secure folder on his laptop labeled Willow Ridge Documentation. He created a subfolder called Phase 1. And then he hit record on a new video file. The war had just begun and Karen didn't know who she was up against. A week later, Mark poured a modest concrete pad behind his garage, a small upgrade to install a steel workbench. He checked the HOA guidelines. No permit required for non-permanent backyard additions. No visibility from the street. No violation. He worked from morning till noon, quietly and alone. Just him, Duke watching nearby, and the distant murmur of birds. By 2 p.m., Karen arrived, not alone this time. Two other board members, Dale and Cynthia, flanked her like palace guards, clipboards ready. Karen didn't bother with pleasantries. She marched straight onto his lawn without knocking. Mark heard the footsteps, walked around the side of the garage, and met them halfway. Karen pointed at the concrete. That, she said sharply, is unauthorized construction. You violated Section 7, subsection D of the HOA guidelines. Mark tilted his head. No permit required for private backyard installations. It's not permanent. It's behind the house. And it's below the fence line. Karen smirked, as if expecting his pushback. That's your interpretation, she said. The board's interpretation is what matters. Dill added, it's not about visibility alone. It's about precedent. If one person does this, others will follow. Cynthia chimed in. We're trying to maintain uniformity. This is a residential neighborhood, not a construction zone. Mark folded his arms, his expression unreadable. I didn't violate any rule, he said evenly, and I'm well within my rights as a homeowner. Karen stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound threatening, without being obvious. We know your type, she said. Lone wolves, alpha mentality. You think discipline makes you untouchable. But this isn't the military, this is a community. And I run it. There was a pause. Mark met her gaze. You think that scares me? Karen gave a slow smile. No. But fines do. She turned, waving her clipboard like a dismissal. You'll be getting a citation. Maybe more. And if you keep escalating, we'll take legal action. The three of them walked off like a triumphant parade. Mark stood still, expression neutral, even as the sun beat down on his face. When they turned the corner, Duke trotted over and sat beside him. Sensing the tension, Mark bent down, patting Duke's head. That was a test run, he muttered. She's not just playing the rule book, she's weaponizing it. He returned inside and uploaded the footage from his backyard camera, clean angles of Karen's entrance, her threats, her refusal to listen to his explanation. He saved the clips under a new folder. Phase 2, the violation notice arrived the next day and delivered, not mailed. Fine, $350, unauthorized construction, additional reviews pending. But what caught Mark's attention wasn't the fine. It was the language. Further violations may result in escalating legal actions, including potential liens or foreclosure processes per HOA bylaws. There it was, the line they were willing to cross. Karen wasn't just trying to control him, she wanted him out. He sat at his desk that night, the room dim except for the blue light of the monitor, files open. State HOA statutes on one screen, Willow Ridge, HOA bylaws on another. He wasn't some guy tinkering in a garage. He was Delta Force, trained in reconnaissance, in pressure strategy, in psychological operations. He led teams through villages that didn't want them there. He knew how to read patterns, and Karen's pattern was obvious. Control, isolate, expel. And every step of it was being recorded. Later that night, his neighbor, Paul, an older man who mostly kept to himself, walked across the street and stood at the edge of Mark's driveway. Mark stepped outside, curious. Paul nodded. I saw what she did with the pad. That's not right. Mark raised an eyebrow. She's done it to others, Paul sighed. She forced a widow on Hawthorne Court to repaint her house 3 times in 1 year. Had a family. Threatened with liens for hanging Christmas lights in October. People are scared to speak out. Mark nodded slowly. This shouldn't be. Paul looked at him. Hopeful, you gonna fight her? Mark glanced at the violation notice in his hand, then back at the neighbor. Not just fight, he said. Expose her. As Paul walked away, Mark turned back toward his house. The lines were drawn, and Karen had no idea she'd just provoked the wrong man. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday. Mark had just finished tightening a hinge on his new tool cabinet when he heard the thunder of engines, a low, guttural rumble rolling down the cul-de-sac like a warning. He stepped out of his garage and saw them coming. 4 motorcycles, big, loud, and customized with skull decals, bandanas, and chrome that screamed for attention. They pulled up slowly, deliberately. and parked diagonally across his driveway, blocking his truck. Doug barked once from the front step, then stood, alert. Mark narrowed his eyes. He didn't recognize any of the men. Not locals, not neighbors. The lead biker, a thick-necked man with long gray hair and a black vest that read, "Ridge Enforcement," stepped off his bike and stretched his arms like he owned the place. Mark stepped forward. "You're blocking my driveway." The biker grinned. "That right?" Karen said. "You might say that." Mark paused. "Karen sent you?" "Didn't say that," the man replied, smirking. "We just help out when there's a resident causing problems." Another biker walked up, snapping a photo of Mark's house. "You see, this here's a deed-restricted community," he said. "Everyone's got to follow the rules." Mark's voice dropped a notch. Calm, controlled. "You don't live here." The first biker chuckled. "No, but Karen called in a few favors. Said you've been stirring things up. Thought maybe someone ought to talk to you, help you rethink your attitude." Mark didn't flinch. "So she sent outsiders to intimidate me." The biker stepped forward. "Close now. Call it community outreach." Mark's expression didn't change. His posture didn't shift, but something in his eyes cooled. Calculating made the biker pause for a beat too long. Then Mark spoke, low and razor sharp. "You have 10 seconds to move your bikes." The biker scoffed. "Or what?" In a single, fluid motion, Mark stepped into the man's space, grabbed his wrist, twisted it with precise torque, and brought him halfway to the ground with nothing more than balance and body weight. No punches, no theatrics, just control. The man yelped and staggered back as Mark released him, calmly resetting his stance. The others stepped back instinctively, unsure whether to move forward or flee. Duke barked once, a deep, thunderous sound. Mark pointed to the curb. "Get off my property." They didn't argue. One by one, they mounted their bikes and rode off. No threats, no comeback, just silence and exhaust fumes left in their wake. From across the street, blinds shifted. A few neighbors had been watching, and from a second-floor window at the end of the street, Karen Simmons stood, arms folded, face tight. She saw everything. That evening, another violation notice was taped to Mark's front door. This one in bold red print. Behavioral infraction. Aggressive conduct toward visitors. Code for point of violation. Considered a threat to community safety. Fine. $500. Investigation pending. Mark chuckled bitterly and peeled it from the door. He walked inside, opened his laptop, and uploaded footage from the incident, every angle from his security cameras. The bikers parking, the confrontation, the takedown, his calm demeanor, their retreat. He saved the file under a new folder, Phase 3, Escalation Evidence. Then he opened a blank document titled Incident Timeline. He began typing July 10th, flag violation, and found it July 13th, garage noise complaint, baseless, July 18th, concrete pad, within code, July 23rd, outsiders sent to intimidate, July 23rd evening, falsified violation, $500 fine, filed same day. Mark stopped typing and stared at the screen for a long moment. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules, she was trying to provoke him into snapping, into making a mistake she could use. But she didn't understand who he was. He had been trained for high-pressure scenarios where one wrong move could cost lives. And he wasn't about to lose to a woman with a clipboard and a thirst for control. Later that night, Mark emailed the HOA board. Subject: formal notice of harassment and threats. Attachments: video footage, violation notices, witness log. CCD the county HOA oversight committee. Just in case. And then he sat back. The next move wouldn't be his. He had all the evidence. Now he just needed Karen to keep digging her own grave. And she would, because tyrants never know when to stop. By the following Thursday, Mark couldn't walk to his mailbox without catching someone filming him. It started with Cynthia, again her phone angled just over the top of a fake fern as she pretended to tend her flower bed, then Dale, strolling passed with a GoPro mounted to his baseball cap like it was a morning jog accessory. But it didn't stop with the board members. 2 houses down, a teenage neighbor whom Mark had once helped fix a flat tire now stood in her driveway, fin up, recording silently as he unloaded groceries. Mark said nothing. He waved politely. And he recorded everything that afternoon. A new letter arrived certified mail this time, due to repeated violations and substantiated reports of hostile behavior. The Willow Ridge Homeowners Association is pursuing formal legal action, including daily fines and a potential lien against your property, as outlined in the bylaws of Section 10F, $2,700 in accumulated fines, a threat of forced arbitration, and, at the bottom, a small note, unpaid fines may result in foreclosure procedures. Mark folded the paper and placed it neatly in a file with the others. It was now unmistakable. Karen was executing her playbook to the letter: push him, isolate him, drain him financially, and then pressure him to sell or lose the home altogether. But she had miscalculated. He wasn't some hot-headed guy with a chip on his shoulder. He was a strategist, and now it was time to hit back with precision. That weekend, Mark showed up at the HOA general meeting, uninvited, but entirely within his rights as a homeowner. The conference room inside the community center buzzed with chatter as residents mingled, traded complaints, and passed round cookies. Mark entered quietly and took a seat in the back row. Conversations slowed. Heads turned. Karen stood at the front of the room beside a PowerPoint slide titled, Community Discipline and Harmony. She froze when she saw him. He waited. She resumed, with a thin smile. As many of you know, we've had an ongoing compliance issue with one resident, ongoing disruption, illegal construction, even physical intimidation. I want to assure you that the board is taking steps to keep this community safe. Several heads nodded. Others, unsure, looked toward Mark. He stood politely, calmly. Karen froze again. With your permission, I'd like to respond, Mark said. Karen hesitated, then motioned stiffly to the podium, expecting a confrontation she could shut down. Mark walked slowly to the front, a folder in one hand, a USB drive in the other. He spoke clearly. No anger, no theatrics. In the last 30 days, I've received 9 violation notices. 3 were proven false through recorded footage. 2 more were for unregulated items that are not explicitly listed in the HOA guidelines. I've also been approached by non-residents acting as enforcers, followed by drones, recorded without consent, and now threatened with foreclosure. He plugged the USB into the laptop attached to the projector. Footage began to play. Karen and her crew trespassing on his property, bikers blocking his driveway, Cynthia filming from the bushes. A hush fell over the room. No narration, no commentary. Just facts. When the video ended, Mark let silence linger. I'm not here to shame anyone. I just want peace. But that peace has to be mutual. No one should live in fear of their HOA. Karen snapped, her voice rising. You don't get to hijack this meeting to attack us. This is our process, our board. Mark met her gaze calmly. Then why do you keep violating your own rules to come after me? Whispers rippled through the crowd. Then Eleanor Price, our long-standing board member who'd been quiet until now, slowly stood. I think we need to revisit our priorities, she said, her voice steady. We can't enforce rules unfairly or selectively. This is a community, not a fiefdom. Karen's mouth tightened, her face pale. Mark stepped back from the podium, and this time, several residents nodded toward him. Not Karen. It wasn't a victory yet, but something had shifted. Cracks were beginning to show. Karen still held the gavel, but her grip was slipping, and Mark, he wasn't done. Not yet. The next morning, Mark brewed his coffee just like always to Sugars. No cream man sat at his kitchen table with Duke snoozing at his feet. But something was different. The silence felt tense, like a held breath, and Mark knew what that meant. Karen wasn't done, and he was getting too close. He opened his laptop and got to work, using public databases, open access tax records, and archived HOA documents. He followed a trail that most neighbors never bothered to look at. It started with an odd line item buried in last year's HOA financial statement. Landscaping services, $38,420. That figure didn't make sense for a neighborhood where each resident handled their own lawn. Mark searched the business name, Greentop Solutions, LLC. A few clicks later, he discovered it was registered under the name Michael A. Simmons, Karen's nephew. The deeper Mark dug, the more layers peeled back. There were no competing bids, no public disclosures, and it wasn't the first year. Greentop had been paid under the table. Over 3 years, the HOA had quietly funneled over $100,000 to Greentop. Even worse, 2 homes previously owned by longtime residents had been foreclosed on by the HOA after ongoing violations that look eerily similar to his own. Both were sold at significantly below market value. Mark cross-checked the sales with a property management firm called Willow Holdings, LLC. A side search revealed the name behind it, Patricia L. Keller, Karen's sister. It wasn't about weeds, flags, or workbenches. Karen was running a quiet scheme: target homes, escalate fines, force them out, and resell the properties to family-linked LLCs. It was a loop, a quiet one, but it was real. Mark leaned back in his chair. The whole game made sense now. She wasn't just power-hungry. She was profiting off people's silence. And now, he had proof. That evening, Mark knocked on a door he'd only passed before. Eleanor Price's house. She'd served on the HOA board for over a decade and was widely respected, but also known for never crossing Karen. Eleanor opened the door cautiously, then softened. Mark, he held up a folder. Got something you need to see. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, she made tea while Mark laid out everything: bank statements, contracts, ownership filings, old meeting minutes. The paper trail wasn't just compelling, it was damning. Eleanor read silently, her hands trembling slightly. Karen said those foreclosures were due to unpaid dues. She murmured. She manufactured the fines, Mark replied. Same way she's doing to me. Eleanor exhaled slowly. If this is true, we'll need to bring it to the full board. But Karen will try to block it. She controls the meeting schedule and the vote timing. Mark nodded. That's why we do this by the book. Quiet, no drama, just facts. Eleanor looked up. You're not afraid of her, are you? I've been in places where fear gets people killed. Mark said simply. This isn't one of them. It's just a neighborhood. She gave a faint smile. Funny how some of the ugliest wars happen on the quietest streets. 2 days later, a new meeting was called. Karen tried to delay it, citing board scheduling conflicts, but Eleanor had already invoked the HOA's charter clause for emergency board review. It would happen with or without her. Karen showed up anyway, dressed sharper than usual, clipboard in hand. Fake confidence layered thick, but something had changed. Board members no longer sat flanking her like loyal soldiers. They spaced themselves out, casting nervous glances her way. Eleanor brought forward the folder. No speeches, no emotion, just evidence. Karen's expression remained neutral at first, eyes flicking from document to document. But as Eleanor read out the LLC names, the family ties, and the contract discrepancies, Karen's mask began to slip. This is absurd, she snapped. You can't prove intent. This is a smear campaign orchestrated by a homeowner you tried to intimidate into silence. Eleanor interrupted. And you're under review for financial misconduct. Karen turned to Mark. You think you're clever, don't you? Mark stared at her calmly. No, just patient. For the first time, Karen didn't have a comeback. The meeting adjourned with a unanimous vote. Karen Simmons would be suspended pending formal investigation. It wasn't over, but the queen was off her throne, and Mark wasn't alone anymore. The neighborhood had started to wake up. Karen was off the board, but she wasn't gone. The following week felt quieter in Willow Ridge. Neighbors smiled more. No new fines appeared on doors, and for a moment, Mark thought the storm had passed. But Karen wasn't the kind of person to retreat. She was regrouping. On Tuesday morning, Mark woke up to flashing red and blue lights outside. To patrol cars, officers standing on his driveway. He stepped out slowly, hands visible. Duke trailing behind with perked ears. Mr. Henderson, one officer asked. That's me. We've received a 911 call reporting suspicious activity and possible illegal weapons on your property. A neighbor claims you've been brandishing a firearm. Mark didn't react. That's not true, and I have security footage that proves it. The officers exchanged a glance. One of them seemed embarrassed. We're required to investigate. May we take a look around? Mark didn't argue. He invited them in, showed them the garage, his secured safe, the workbench, the cameras. Duke sat quietly near the officers the entire time, till thumping softly. 15 minutes later, the officers apologized. Looks like you've been set up, sir. Sorry for the disruption. They left. But Mark's mind was already racing. A false police report wasn't just escalation, it was desperation. And that meant Karen was cornered. That night, Mark heard a knock on his back door. Strange, no one used the entrance. He checked the monitor. A young man in a hoodie stood there, hands raised in a non-threatening posture. Mid-20s, nervous, fidgeting. Mark opened the door slowly. Duke stood beside him, tense but silent. Can I talk to you? The man asked. Just for a second, please. Mark studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. Inside, the man glanced around, then spoke quickly. My name's Jason. I live over in Briarwood. Neighboring HOA. Karen's sister manages our board. Mark didn't speak. He let the man unravel. I work part-time for Greentop, landscaping stuff. Karen, she asked me to do something for her a few weeks ago. Said she needed help nudging out a troublemaker. I didn't know what she meant. But then she gave me $200 to fly a drone over your yard and record video. Jason paused, licking his lips. She said she'd make sure I got hired full-time. Then it got worse. She told me to file a noise complaint using a burner phone. Said she needed to build a record. Mark leaned in. And the call to the police. Jason nodded slowly. She begged me to do it. Said you were dangerous. Said you had military PTSD and could snap. I didn't want to, man. But I'm on probation for something stupid last year. Karen said she'd talk to her sister and help wipe it. Said she had pull with the Mark exhaled, not in shock, but in confirmation. This was the missing piece. A manipulated pawn. A young man with something to lose, and Karen willing to exploit anyone to win. You have proof? Mark asked. Jason reached into his hoodie and handed over a cheap burner phone. I recorded her voice memo, her telling me what to say to the cops. It's all on here. Mark took the phone, nodded once. Jason looked at him, pleading, I don't want to go down for this. I just wanted a job. Mark's tone softened. You did the right thing coming here. Now let me handle the rest. The next morning, Mark called his attorney. The audio was clear. Karen's voice, unmistakable, instructing Jason to fabricate an emergency, to say Mark threatened him with a weapon. That afternoon, Mark submitted the evidence to the police and to the county's HOA regulatory authority. His lawyer included the documentation of harassment, financial fraud, and witness coercion. It was no longer just an HOA conflict. It was criminal. Karen's mask was gone. The control, the charm, the clipboard diplomacy had crumbled into a desperate attempt to frame a man she couldn't control. And now, the system she manipulated was finally turning against her. The story had flipped. Karen wasn't the protector of the neighborhood. She was its predator. And Mark had just handed the town a flashlight. 2 weeks later, the official letter arrived, stamped from the County Legal Affairs Department. It notified the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association that Karen Simmons was under criminal investigation for conspiracy, falsifying police reports, and financial misconduct under HOA statutes. The neighborhood, once tight-lipped and nervous, was buzzing now. The news had spread not from gossip, but from the facts Mark had uncovered and shared carefully with the right people. By the following Monday, Karen's photo had been quietly removed from the community center's leadership wall. Her name was no longer on any email bulletins. Her power had vanished, stripped not in a dramatic showdown, but piece by piece, as every lie she told came unraveled under the weight of the truth. Mark hadn't gloated. He didn't have to. The facts had done the work. That evening, the HOA board hosted an emergency town hall meeting. For once, it was packed, standing room only. Homeowners who hadn't attended a meeting in years now filled every chair. Mark stood off to the side, not seeking attention, just listening. At the front of the room, Eleanor Price addressed the crowd. "We owe a debt of transparency to this community," she began. "The prior leadership abused its authority, manipulated the rules, and endangered one of our own neighbors through fabricated complaints. That ends now." A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. "We're opening a full audit of HOA spending. For the last 5 years, we're terminating all contracts tied to personal connections. And starting next month, we're implementing a vote-based disciplinary policy to ensure no one can be targeted by a single voice." She paused, then looked toward Mark. "And finally," she said, "on behalf of this board and this neighborhood, I want to publicly apologize to Mr. Henderson." All heads turned. Mark hesitated for a second, then stepped forward. He didn't want applause. He wanted peace. But he could feel the change in the air. "I didn't come here to fight," he said plainly. "I came to live in peace. But when peace is replaced by fear, and rules are used as weapons, someone has to stand up." He scanned the room. "It wasn't just about me. It could have been any of you. And if we don't hold each other accountable, then what are we even doing in a neighborhood?" No cheers, just silence and understanding. That was enough. The fallout came quickly. Karen was arrested without fanfare outside her sister's real estate office 2 days later. The footage showed her stone-faced and silent, escorted to a squad car in heels and a wrinkled blazer. Charges were filed for fraud, abuse of authority, and conspiracy to commit false reporting. Her sister, who helped arrange the property sales, was also under investigation. Jason, the young man who had come forward, was offered a diversion deal. Mark even spoke on his behalf to the prosecutor, noting that Jason had been manipulated. It was over weeks past. Life at Willow Ridge began to resemble the peaceful community it pretended to be. Violations returned to being about actual problems: overgrown lawns, paint colors, mailbox height. But this time, they were handled by a newly elected board. When they actually listened, Mark returned to working in his garage. Duke lounged beside him again, no longer growling when a car pulled up. Neighbors began stopping by, not with complaints, but with friendly waves and quiet gratitude. Paul from across the street brought over a six-pack. "Heard you helped save this place," he said. "Couldn't have done it without you." Mark chuckled. "Didn't save anything, just cleaned up the mess." Eleanor dropped by with Duke's favorite dog treats and a formal letter. The board had officially cleared all of Mark's violations and refunded the bogus fines. They even added a motion to exempt American flags from further review. Mark thanked her. But the real reward wasn't paperwork. It was peace. Real, earned peace. One morning, Mark sat on his porch, sipping coffee while Duke chased birds across the lawn. He watched as a new couple moved into houses down, young, excited, unloading furniture from a moving truck. Karen would have been the first to greet them with a clipboard and a warning. But not anymore. Mark stood, walked over, and extended his hand. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said, with a genuine smile. "It's a good place now." And this time, it really was.